Look, I love the world of cosmetic medicine. I really do. It has an incredible power to boost our confidence when done right. But after years of analyzing routines and seeing the aftermath of viral trends, I have to be honest with you. There's a huge difference between a procedure being available and it being intelligent. Today, I want to talk about the popular beauty procedures that I would never get and would never recommend to someone I care about. We're moving past the glossy marketing to look at the clinical reality, because sometimes the best aesthetic decision you can make is knowing what to refuse. Before we dive into the risks that no one is telling you about, do me a quick favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep bringing this kind of honest, fluff-free analysis to you. When we talk about facial aesthetics, there is one procedure that has absolutely exploded on social media because of how satisfying the before and after photos look. I'm talking about liquid rhinoplasty, or what most people simply call nose fillers. On the surface, the appeal is massive. If you have a small bump on your bridge or a tip that droops slightly, the idea of fixing it in 15 minutes without a single incision sounds like a dream. No general anesthesia, no weeks of wearing a cast, and no surgical bills. It's marketed as the ultimate lunch break transformation. But here is the part that often gets glossed over in the consultation room. The nose is one of the most dangerous areas of the face to inject. To understand why I would never get this done, we have to look at the anatomy. The blood supply to the nose is incredibly complex, and more importantly, it's what we call a terminal circulation area.
This means the vessels are small, and there isn't much of a backup plan if one gets blocked. When a practitioner injects hyaluronic acid into the nose, they are working in a very tight, confined space. If that filler is accidentally injected into a blood vessel, or if it's injected so close to a vessel that it compresses it, the blood flow stops. This is called a vascular occlusion. When the skin doesn't get blood, it doesn't get oxygen. Within hours, the tissue can start to die. This leads to skin necrosis, which can leave permanent disfiguring scars that are far harder to fix than a simple bump on the bridge. Even more frightening is the connection between the nasal arteries and the ophthalmic artery, which supplies the eyes. There have been documented cases where filler injected into the nose traveled back through the vessels and caused immediate, permanent blindness. This isn't about being a scaremonger. It's about looking at the risk-to-reward ratio. When you undergo a surgical rhinoplasty with a board-certified surgeon, it is a major procedure, yes, but it is a controlled, predictable environment where the anatomy is visualized. With fillers, the injector is essentially working blind under the skin. Even with the most experienced hands, the risk is never zero because everyone's vascular map is slightly different. The convenience of avoiding surgery simply doesn't outweigh the potential for a life-altering complication like vision loss or tissue death. If the goal is a permanent change to the most central feature of your face, the only predictable path is surgery, not a temporary gel that carries such a heavy biological price. Now, let's move on to another trend that promised to revolutionize how we handle aging, the thread lift. For a long time, the holy grail of aesthetics was finding a way to get the results of a facelift without actually doing a facelift. That's exactly how thread lifts were sold to us. The idea is that dissolvable sutures with tiny barbs are inserted under the skin to hook the tissue and pull it upward. It sounds logical, right? You pull the string, the face goes up, and you look 10 years younger instantly. But the reality of how these threads interact with human biology is often a very different story. The first major issue is the sheer lack of durability. The human face is incredibly mobile. We talk, we eat, we smile, we yawn. Every time we move, we are putting tension on those tiny barbs holding our tissues up. Most women find that the visible lift from threads lasts anywhere from 3 to 6 months, at most. For a procedure that can cost thousands of dollars and involves significant swelling and bruising, that is a very poor return on investment. But the short-lived results are actually the least of my concerns.
The real problem lies in what happens under the surface of the skin. Threads work by causing controlled inflammation. Your body recognizes the thread as a foreign object and tries to heal around it, creating a small amount of scar tissue. This is what's supposed to firm the skin. However, this internal scarring is often irregular. It can lead to a puckered or dimpled appearance that is visible when you smile or move your face. Because these threads are inserted blindly through a cannula, there is very little control over exactly which layer of fat or muscle they are grabbing.
This lack of precision often results in an asymmetrical look that is very difficult to correct because, unlike filler, you can't just melt a thread if you don't like the result. You often have to just wait for it to dissolve, which can take a long time while you deal with the visual consequences. There's also a long-term cost to consider that most people don't think about in their 40s. If you eventually decide that you do want a surgical facelift in your 50s or 60s, having a history of multiple thread lifts can make that surgery much more complicated. The internal scar tissue, what we call fibrosis, created by the threads, changes the planes of the face. It makes it harder for a surgeon to cleanly lift and reposition the muscles and skin. Essentially, you are trading a few months of a subtle, temporary lift for a lifetime of compromised tissue quality. It's a classic example of a procedure that captures our desire for a quick fix, but fails to respect the long-term health of our facial structures. When we think about the long-term impact of thread lifts, we have to talk about what surgeons often find when they eventually go in to perform a real facelift on someone who has had multiple rounds of threads. They describe the tissue as being gnarly. Instead of the clean, distinct layers of fat and muscle that a surgeon expects to see, they find a web of tough, irregular scar tissue. This makes the surgery much more difficult, much longer, and sometimes less effective because the skin has lost its natural elasticity. It's a biological debt that many women don't realize they are signing up for. The promise of a non-surgical facelift is, in many ways, an oxymoron. You cannot achieve surgical results without surgery, and trying to do so with threads often leaves you with a result that is both underwhelming in the short term and problematic in the long term. If you're looking for a lift, save your money and wait until you're ready for a more definitive, predictable solution that respects your anatomy. Now, let's pivot to something that is a bit more nuanced, because this next procedure isn't inherently bad, but it is being marketed and performed in a way that I find deeply concerning. I'm talking about radiofrequency microneedling, often referred to as RF microneedling. You've probably seen the ads for devices like Morpheus 8 or Potenza. They promise to tighten the skin, fix acne scars, and give you a total facial rejuvenation. And in the right hands for the right patient, these tools can be incredible. But here is where the danger lies. RF microneedling is one of the most operator-dependent procedures in the entire aesthetic industry. Unlike a standard laser that mostly works on the surface, RF microneedling uses tiny needles to deliver heat deep into the dermis. If that heat is delivered too deep or at a temperature that is too high, it can do something irreversible. It can cause adipocyte apoptosis. In plain English, it can melt your facial fat. Before we get into why losing facial fat is the absolute last thing you want as you age, I want to pause for a second. If you're finding this breakdown helpful and you want more of this no-nonsense look at beauty, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me reach more women who are trying to navigate this confusing market. Now, why is melting facial fat such a disaster? When we are young, we have what we call baby fat, that beautiful, plump volume in our cheeks and around our eyes that makes us look healthy and vibrant. As we age, we naturally lose this fat. This loss of volume is actually what causes the skin to sag and fold. It's not just about the skin getting loose, it's about the structure underneath disappearing.
When someone goes into a med spa looking for skin tightening and an inexperienced technician uses aggressive settings on an RF microneedling device, they might actually be destroying the very fat pads that are keeping the face looking young. I have seen countless women post-procedure who say their skin looks hollow or gaunt after a few sessions. They went in wanting to look younger and came out looking 5 years older because they lost that essential volume. The problem is compounded by where these procedures are being done. In many parts of the country, med spas are popping up on every corner, and they aren't always supervised by a board-certified dermatologist or plastic surgeon. You might have a technician who has only had a few hours of training on a specific machine. They are often taught to use one-size-fits-all settings, but the skin on your forehead is not the same thickness as the skin on your cheeks or your neck. If you use a depth of 4 millimeters on a thin face, you are going straight into the fat layer. This is why it is so critical to understand that the device is just a tool. The person holding it is what matters. If you are going to do RF microneedling, you must ensure that your provider understands facial anatomy and the risk of volume loss. Personally, I would never get this procedure done in a high-volume med spa that focuses on deals and packages.
The risk of looking skeletal or gaunt is simply too high when the goal is to look refreshed. What's even more frustrating is that RF microneedling is often sold as a mini facelift or a major tightening procedure. While it can definitely help with skin texture, pores, and very fine lines, the tightening effect is often much more subtle than the marketing suggests. When women don't see the massive lift they were promised after one session, they often go back for more or ask for higher settings. This is exactly when the damage happens. We've entered an era where we think more is better and deeper is better, but in the face, that logic is dangerous. Your facial fat is like gold. Once it's gone, it's incredibly expensive and difficult to put back through fillers or fat grafting. We have to stop treating these high-energy devices like they are just another facial. They are medical procedures that carry real risks to your long-term facial structure. There is also the issue of grid marks and scarring. When the needles are heated, if the contact with the skin isn't perfect or if the skin's barrier is compromised, you can end up with permanent track marks or a waffle-like texture on your skin. I've seen women who have struggled for years to fix the texture issues caused by a single aggressive RF microneedling session. It's heartbreaking because they were just trying to improve their appearance, and they ended up with a problem that is much harder to hide than a few wrinkles. This is why I always tell women, if you're looking for texture improvement, there are much safer ways to get there. Whether it's a series of gentle chemical peels or a non-ablative laser that stays in the upper layers of the skin, you don't always need to go deep to see a glow.
Sometimes the most effective approach is the most conservative one. While we are on the subject of high-energy devices that promise a lot but carry significant risks, we have to talk about the plasma pen. You might have seen this being called fibroblast skin tightening. It's a small, handheld device that looks like a pen and produces a tiny electric arc. When that arc touches the skin, it creates a small dark char or a microburn. The idea is that these hundreds of tiny burns will cause the skin to shrink and tighten as they heal, especially around the eyelids or the neck. On social media, it looks incredibly high-tech and precise. But in the world of clinical dermatology, the plasma pen is often seen as a very unpredictable tool that lacks the sophisticated safety features of a medical-grade laser. The biggest problem with the plasma pen is the lack of consistency. When you use a professional CO2 laser or an erbium laser, the machine is calibrated to deliver a very specific amount of energy at a very specific depth, down to the micrometer. With a plasma pen, the energy delivery is much more manual and operator-dependent. If the person holding the pen stays a fraction of a second too long on one spot, or if they hold it at a slightly different angle, the burn goes too deep. This is where we see real trouble. Because the skin on the eyelids and the neck is among the thinnest on the entire body, there is almost zero margin for error. One mistake can lead to permanent scarring or hypopigmentation, which is when the skin loses its color and leaves behind white, ghostly spots that are almost impossible to fix. Beyond the scarring, there is the issue of PIH, or post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. This is especially common for women with olive or darker skin tones. When you cause hundreds of tiny burns on the face, the skin's natural response is to produce melanin to protect the area. Instead of having tighter skin, many women end up with hundreds of tiny brown spots that last for months or even become permanent. It's a massive aesthetic price to pay for a tightening effect that is often very minimal compared to what a properly performed laser treatment or a surgical procedure could achieve. To me, the plasma pen represents a shortcut technology. It tries to mimic the results of expensive medical lasers, but without the engineering and safety protocols that make those lasers worth the investment. It's simply too much of a gamble for the delicate skin of the face. Before we move on to our final and perhaps most controversial topic, I want to take a quick second to remind you, if you're finding this information valuable and you want to stay informed about what's actually happening in the beauty industry, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss these deep dives into what really works and what doesn't. Now, let's talk about something that feels very different from a medical procedure, but is actually one of the most permanent decisions you can make for your face: permanent makeup. I'm talking about tattooed eyeliner, microblading for eyebrows, and lip blushing. I completely understand why this is so tempting. We are all busy. The idea of waking up with perfectly defined eyes, full eyebrows, and a hint of color on our lips sounds like the ultimate lifestyle upgrade. It promises to save us 20 minutes every morning and keep us looking put together even at the gym or the pool. But as someone who looks at the long-term trajectory of facial aging, I see permanent makeup as a major aesthetic trap. The first issue is the most obvious one. Trends change. If you look back at the history of beauty, eyebrows are the most trend-dependent feature on the face. In the 90s, everyone wanted thin, high arches. In the 2010s, it was all about the heavy, blocked-in look. Today, we are moving toward a more natural, fluffy brow. When you tattoo a specific shape onto your face, you are freezing a trend into your skin. What looks modern and chic today might look dated and harsh in 5 or 10 years. And unlike a bad haircut, you can't just grow it out. While there are laser removal options for tattoos, removing pigment from the face, especially near the eyes or on the delicate skin of the lips, is a long, painful, and very expensive process that doesn't always yield a perfect result. But even if you choose a very classic shape, you have to account for the fact that your face is not a static canvas. Your face is constantly changing. As we age, our skin loses elasticity and begins to shift downward due to gravity. That perfectly placed winged eyeliner you got in your 30s might end up looking slanted or droopy in your 50s because the skin of your eyelid has shifted. The same goes for eyebrows. As the brow bone loses volume and the forehead skin relaxes, a tattooed arch can end up sitting in a place that no longer aligns with your natural bone structure. You essentially end up with floating makeup that doesn't move with your face, which creates a very unnatural, uncanny valley appearance. Then, we have to talk about the chemistry of the pigments themselves. Tattoo ink in the skin is not stable forever. Over time, the body's immune system tries to break down the pigment particles. This often causes the color to shift or bleed. We've all seen the blue or gray eyebrows on women who had work done years ago. This happens because the warmer tones in the ink fade faster, leaving behind the cooler, darker bases. On the lips, pink and red pigments can often turn an unnatural orange or a muddy purple over time. Even if you go back for touch-ups, you are just layering more and more pigment into the skin, which eventually leads to a saturated look where the skin can no longer hold the color cleanly. The lines become blurred, the colors become muddy, and the convenience you were looking for turns into a lifelong maintenance problem that usually ends with a laser removal specialist. Beyond the aesthetic risks of permanent makeup, there is a medical side that rarely gets mentioned in the glossy brochures. Some people develop late-onset allergic reactions to the pigments used in tattoos, even years after the procedure. Because the pigment is literally embedded in your skin, these reactions can be incredibly difficult to treat, often leading to chronic inflammation or rashes that are persistent and painful. There is also the issue of medical imaging. Some older pigments contain metallic elements that can actually heat up or cause irritation during an MRI scan. While modern pigments are generally safer, it's just another layer of complexity that you're adding to your biological history for a bit of morning convenience. In my view, the most beautiful thing about makeup is that it is temporary. It allows us to evolve, to change our style, and to adjust our look as our faces naturally mature. When you take away that fluidity, you're not just saving time. You're losing the freedom to age with grace and flexibility. As we look back at all these procedures, the liquid nose jobs, the thread lifts, the aggressive microneedling, the plasma pens, and the permanent makeup, a very clear pattern begins to emerge. The beauty industry is exceptionally good at selling us the shortcut. It sells the idea that we can have surgical results without the surgery, or that we can have permanent beauty without the permanent commitment to maintenance. But the truth is, your body doesn't work in shortcuts. Every time we intervene with the structure of our face, there is a biological cost. Sometimes that cost is just a few $1,000s and a disappointing result that fades in 3 months. But other times, that cost is permanent scarring, lost facial volume, or even vision loss. When you are deciding whether or not to undergo a new, trending procedure, I want you to use a very specific set of criteria. Don't look at the before and after photos on a social media page. Those are the highlights, not the average. Instead, look at the triad of real risk, real durability, and real biological cost. Ask yourself, is the outcome predictable? Is the safety profile strong? And if something goes wrong, is the damage reversible? If the answer to any of those questions is no, then the procedure simply isn't worth the risk. Mature aesthetics isn't about doing every new thing that hits the market. It's about having the wisdom to know which innovations are actually just expensive gambles. My goal isn't to make you afraid of cosmetic medicine. I truly believe that when used conservatively and with respect for anatomy, these tools can be life-changing. But we have to be smart consumers. We have to demand transparency and prioritize the long-term health of our skin over a quick fix. Your face is the only one you're ever going to have, and it's worth protecting from the whims of viral trends. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this honest breakdown. If you haven't already, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update. But actually, I prepared a special video about the real reason your hair is still falling out and 7 easy habits to fix it. Click on the screen to watch it. See you there.